Back. If you are just joining us, you're on to your favorite program, Democracy on the Rule of Law. With me on the show today is Barrister Obiora Ome. Barrister Obiora Ome, welcome you to the show this evening.
Thank you very much, and a very good evening to our esteemed viewers there, both at home and in diaspora.
And also with me today is Barrister Deji Olale. Barrister Deji, welcome you to the show this evening.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be on the show once again.
All right. Without wasting much of our time, we will just go into the nitty-gritty of today's episode. Of course, is this a coup? Is this coup one too many in Africa? Because obviously we had the coup in some other West African country earlier in the year, and this is another one. When we are thinking that, of course, we should be having democratic stability in this part of the world.
Yes, the coup in Madagascar, or change of government, or restoration of order, whichever one that one chooses to term it, is something that is of serious concern to everybody in West Africa, particularly in Nigeria. The reason is this: I've always believed that the worst civilian government is better than the best military government. But a lot of people are coming to challenge that assertion. We know that since late September, there have been protests, mass protests, demonstrations in Madagascar. And what was the reason? The youths came out, despite the presence of the military, police, and others, and they were protesting that there were frequent and incessant outages of electricity and water. There was high-level corruption, poor public services, and a lot of inefficiencies in the system. And they demanded that those in power must take care of their welfare. The protests continued, and their president then, and Jelena, ordered the military to shoot those protesters, contrary to international law instruments and norms, because protesters have right to protest. There's right to strike and protest.
Okay, you believe that the actual president, of course,
the president and those in power ordered that they be shot, but this elite group of soldiers, the capstan, decided not to obey the order to shoot.
So you believe that the president eventually led to his overthrow?
Of course, the people say that the cost of living was exorbitant, unbearable. Basic amenities were not there, and there's a level that human beings can tolerate. And when they got to the zenith of their tolerance, they protested, and good enough, the elite military decided to align with the youth. And in the process, the president was eased out.
We'll come back to that line of thought because we want to know if there were no other options that could have been used. So, Barrister, let's take you.
Yes, we all know that coup d'etat is an aberration in any democracy. Most democracies today will not admit of any military intervention in any form, because the military is supposed to serve the populace, the people, and power in a democracy belongs to the people, as you know. But unfortunately, we've had this spate of military regimes coming in as an interventionist government over the years, particularly in many parts of Africa, basically because of the attitude of our politicians, the questions of bad governance, inability to deliver the dividend to democracy to the people, and the recklessness of these politicians. Corruption in high places had been the bane of our form of democracy in Africa, and that's why you find military intervention becoming very popular in many climes in various parts of the continent. And the Madagascar experience is not different from that same attitude, across board. Of course, you remember that of Niger, that of Mali, Burkina Faso, and all those other South Sahel governments that have gone out to try to stabilize their nation at the expense of democracy. And in some quarters also, you will know that some people have argued that democracy is an aberration to our African system of governance, that in fact is antithetical to the kind of government that we have always had, culturally speaking, as Africans. You know that it's a Western imposition that obviously do not take care of the natural tradition and the processes of our people. So to that extent, that's why you find that many Africans receive military regimes when they come in at their interventionist point.
All right. We'll go on a very short break, and then we'll return. Of course, Barrister have said the high-handedness of the political leaders, of course, were the reason for this particular coup. And of course, Barrister Deji have said that military coup is an aberration. You know. So we'll go in depth into some of this train of thought when we return from this break. Stay tuned. So Barrister of course, you've saying the military have said that this is not a military coup. They came in to stabilize the uprising, and of course that there will be a brand new constitution, and they have given a timeline for an election. So what is your opinion, of course, given your experience with this kind of scenario in the past?
Yes, I do not agree with the military that what took place is not a military coup, not a coup d'etat. The reason is this: in any form of governance in a country, there are only two ways of getting power. It's either through the ballot box or through the power of the gun. If it's through the ballot box, through the process of election, and the president wins, then he has been given power by the masses. If it's a military coup and it succeeds, then by the doctrine of effectiveness, there is legitimacy. It does not matter what the other people there may think. Now, what has taken place in Madagascar is not just intervention, it's a military coup that has succeeded. And it is already legitimacy because they're already in power. Now, looking at what has happened there, it is a lesson for African leaders, everyone. The reason is this: the very essence of government in the first place, when people gather together to live together, is because of the welfare of the masses. And what are those basic things? These are many things. So that the lives of the people will be meaningful lives. Just like we discussed in a couple of weeks ago, taking a cue from the decision of the Supreme Court of India, that when you look at human rights, the right to life has with it the right to food, shelter, and other things that makes life meaningful and worth living. Now, in African context, you discover that most of the leaders are more interested in themselves, amassing, unfathomable, humongous wealth that some of them start abroad. They are not interested in the welfare of the masses, which is the supreme law. And that has resulted in leaders in Africa amassing wealth for generations unborn. Whereas if you look at the other side of the divide, what is the other side of the divide? The Western world. People in America, in UK, in Canada, other countries don't seek for power because they want to steal their nature's money. They seek for power because they want fame. They already made their money. And that is why those that have been past presidents in America, in other countries, you look at their financial records, you see that getting there did not get them richer. But the reverse is the case in Africa. And that is why when Africans are under administrations that are insensitive, then they may get to a point that the people will protest. And when they protest, the military that is not meant to be there as leading a nation may come in. Like Burkina Faso, the people were suffering, and the story appears to be different now, even though a military man is there. And what lesson do we need to leaders? If you're a leader, don't just be listening to the sycophants. Those are the candidates of power that are praising them that is the best thing that has ever happened to their nation. Listen to what the masses are saying. The people of Madagascar said we have suffered enough without water, without electricity. Corruption is in high places. The public services are not functioning. And when the protest was on, the president ordered the soldiers to shoot them aside. And of course, you know that under international law, protesters are expected to be protected, not to be attacked.
All right.
Good enough, they were not shot. The military has taken over. Like I said, it's a military coup that has succeeded. And now, the question that needs to be answered is this. Within the 18 to 24 months, will they be able to get a new constitution? As they have said, they are going to get a new constitution. And again, I do not see reason why the military junta there now should have, scrapped the institutions in Madagascar. It was not necessary because virtually all the public institutions, just a few were left. Why?
All right. Mr. Deji, they're just saying that the worst democracy is better than the best military.
Yes.
And of course, we've seen military intervention all over the years, even in our country, in Nigeria. And of course, so many people argue that what justification did the military have, to take over from the civilian government, given their records. Of course, their records have not been covered in stellar excellence so far. Most of the military that you've seen all over the world, it turns out to be even worse than the democracy that they tend to correct or remove. So what justification does the military have, to feel that when there is misrule or corruption that they should intervene when they themselves are so guilty of that same act?
Well, thank you very much. I think over the years, we have tended to tolerate military regimes out of compulsion, out of the need for maybe development of the state. And of course, when you compare military regimes to civilian regimes, the only thing you find that is an attractive issue with the military is their efficiency of governance. The fact that they can easily make laws and implement those laws and enforce those laws, which you find difficult in most civilian government because of the element of democracy and expansive administrative bottleneck that you find in government. So that's a distraction for civilian government. Other than that, there is no justification whatsoever for the military to take over the reign of governance, because it's actually treasonable. It's just that we keep talking, the concept of effective control and legitimacy that had always been used as jurisprudence for allowing military regimes or for permissiveness of military regime shouldn't even exist. Because look, legitimacy, when you talk of the concept of legitimacy itself, legitimacy is the voluntary consent or the voluntary assertion or the voluntary power vested in another person, not a forceful acquisition of authority and power. What we have in military regime is forceful acquisition of the powers of the state, powers of governance. So can you say a government that takes a people that takes the governance of a state through the barrel of the gun or the use of force, can that actually claim legitimacy just because the coup succeeded?
Yeah, but
success by the doctrine of effectiveness. And you see, the other side of the coin is this.
That doctrine of effectiveness.
If we, as we have seen in Madagascar, the people are suffering, and they got to a point that they could no longer bear it. They decided to go to the street to protest.
Yes,
they have any solution. There's no solution.
I understand.
So the military coming in is to calm the situation, stabilize, and then hand over to a democratically elected government. Now, so if a tight president refuses to change, the masses are suffering. People are dying of starvation, and there's no other way other than for the people to come out and protest. Then this is just a wake-up call to leaders to do the right thing.
I agree with you.
Because when they take the oath of office, what are they sworn to do? to uphold the constitution. And what does the constitution say? In Nigeria here, the constitution talks about the welfare in chapter.
Yeah, but we are saying that what justification does this military has to do? Because when they get the power, those welfare that they
I can give you the answer. The justification is that power resides with the masses. The masses give out power. And the masses say, we are tired of this.
They consent to the military. They consent to the military seizing power.
The masses protested. Protest is a signal that we don't want this anymore.
My dear brother, let us mix two issues. There are two issues involved here. The question of legitimacy of that government, any military government, is an issue that, despite the fact that the concept of effective control, the concept of legitimacy for the military have been created by the courts. The truth of it is that under real jurisprudence, there is no military regime that is legitimate. It's a self-serving interventionist government. And every government that takes over power over a democratic rule is treasonable. It's just that we have not, over the years, we have not taken them to task. We have not taken the military to task after their governance.
So you condemn the military takeover?
At all levels of the military.
Even the military takeover was corrupt.
When the democratic government has an internal inbuilt system
to checkmate
bad governance. Of course, there are bad governance in even most advanced democracies in the world, but you don't see military intervention.
Now, the area I want to disagree with you is this.
Yes.
This nation, Madagascar, they were having it very tough.
Every nation.
And when they protested, the president was impeached. In the bid to stop his impeachment, he came up with a decree to dissolve the lower house, so that they keep on staying in power, doing what is not in the interest of the people he represents.
All right, let me just take you there.
Yes.
And of course, if we go by that logic, you yes, that most African countries will go on the military, because when you check the indices, you look at Cameroon. Of course, their president have been elected 96 years, been re-elected, even though there is an accusation of widespread corruption and rigging. And so even our own country, so many people are complaining. Should that be a justification for an intervention?
Now, in Cameroon, the people have not gone out to protest the way they did in Madagascar. But what I'm saying is the point I want everybody to notice this, that the way our leaders are going about living, especially in Africa,
that is
not the right way. They are there to amass wealth. They are there to encourage a system of inequality. They are there for their selfish interest, instead of ensuring that the lives of the people are improved. That is why I say it's a wake-up call.
Yeah,
because if you look at the indices, if you take a kind of assessment of countries in Africa and West Africa in general, you discover that a lot of the leaders are not doing the right thing. And that is why I'm not in agreement with Africa Union just suspending Madagascar. Africa Union as a group need to come together and look at what happens in countries in
their respective countries.
Yes, and advise themselves, advise the leaders, because there's a degree of tolerance, and when it gets to the point, to melting point, it will get to a point that people say, whatever happens, let it happen. Yeah. If I die, I die. You get to that point.
Are there no alternative?
Yes.
To military takeover when there is this issue of corruption, ineffectiveness, and the people want change?
Yes.
Are there no inbuilt mechanism in democracy that could? Of course, we'll see in advanced countries, even when they do not like their leader or they feel that their leaders are not doing the right thing, there are always a mechanism to allow a situation where the military does not even come close to power. power. So is there no alternative in these guys in order to allow this transition or the expression of the people's will without necessarily the military taking over power?
Now, the area I agree with my good friend, Barrister Obiora, is the fact that what is happening now, the military, the upsurge of military regime in Africa, it's caused essentially by the bad governance of the civilian government. Yes. The civilian. I agree totally on that point, and that's why I also agree that it's a wake-up call. Yes. The military regime that is coming up is a wake-up call to African leaders. But having said that, you discover that African leaders are very ruthless. There are many of them that are beasts. Let me use that word, because they have refused to allow. Yes, that's a harsh one. Yes, they have refused to allow. They have refused to allow normality and rationality in governance. They have refused to allow people to express their will willingly. And the repression of the votes of the people, some of them have perpetuated themselves in governance for too long, far too long. The example we have in Cameroon now is an aberration. The man has been there for 43 good years. Yeah, but and he has made it impossible because of now if a military
because of time. What would be your advice for Africans? Before we go to the next topic.
My to the question that my brother.
But the fact remains that military regime are still aberration.
Now, the most already constitutionally, there are mechanisms for constitutional changes without military intervention. Yes. Because in a normal situation, in a proper democratic setup, you have the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. Now, if the president, as the head of the executive, is doing the wrong thing, then the legislature will get up and get him impeached, remove him, and get a replacement for him. But in a country where there is an unholy marriage between the executive and the legislature, you can never see any impeachment. And in fact, in Nigeria, we've had cases when a sitting president boasted that they can't be nothing will happen, and nothing happened. You understand? So the mechanism for change, constitutional changes, has been polluted. It's no longer working effectively. If the legislatures are rubber stamp legislatures, whatever the president does or the executive does is acceptable. That is not a normal set, because each is expected to be a check on the other. That's why you have checks and balances. So the other alternative, which you also provide for, is impeachment or removal. But because of the way that they are piling together, that appears difficult, if not impossible. And that is why in a situation where there's a high degree of discontent, where the people feel oppressed, where there's a repression, where in fact where peaceful change is not possible, violent change becomes inevitable.
But now, the people also have, is unfortunately the African people don't know how to resist bad governing, and that's one of the key parts of democracy, is that the people are the active force for change. A bad government, when the people rise up against bad government, it's not only in the area of voting or waiting for election, because elections are manipulated by these same bad leaders. So it is when the bad leaders are afraid, when the people take to the streets, when they occupy the land, no government can withstand it, because power belongs to the people. By the time Africans begin to take the destinies in their hand to ensure that bad government are driven out by occupation of the country, by the people, things will change, not the military.
There's another important point we need to note before we move to the second topic, and which is this: in a normal democratic dispensation, there's inbuilt mechanism for change, proper change, true election that is free, fair, and credible, and
that cannot happen in Africa.
Election where the people will decide who becomes their leader. And in a country where out of say 200 million, less than 50 million people participate in an election, the people have not chosen their leader.
All right.
Because of what apathy in election and all that. So there's need for our leaders to ensure that they put in place institutional safeguards to ensure normal change over of government. They also need to ensure there's rule of law, supremacy of the constitution, the rule of law. The government in power must always abide by the law. Because
all right, the government in power must always abide by the rule of law, and of course power belongs to the people.